June 6, 1944, 01:10 a.m., Normandy, France. The night was still, heavy with the kind of silence that presses against your ears. In a small chateau near Saint-Lô, General Friedrich Dollmann of the German 7th Army sat over a map scattered with reports, none of which made sense. Somewhere off the coast, radar operators claimed to have spotted a massive fleet, but the situation reports were fragmented, conflicting. Lightning flickered across the channel, briefly illuminating the ink-black horizon. For hours, the German Coastal Command had been chasing ghosts, decoys, false blips, and phantom landings. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel wasn't even in France. He was back in Germany, celebrating his wife's birthday, convinced the weather was too poor for any invasion. And yet, out there, something enormous was moving. At 1:30 a.m., a young signal officer burst into the room, breathless. "Herr General, paratroopers. Reports from Sainte-Mère-Église. Hundreds of them." Dollmann frowned. Impossible. The Allies wouldn't risk an airborne drop in this storm. He leaned closer to the map, his fingers trembling slightly. It must be a diversion, as it has to be. But on the beaches beyond Caen, Allied naval guns were already turning toward the French coast. Hundreds of ships, thousands of men. Engines whispered beneath the waves. In the flickering candlelight of the command room, Dollmann looked to his staff officers, pale, uncertain, clutching their headphones like lifelines. For years, German command had been certain of one thing. When the invasion came, they would know exactly where and when. But tonight, they didn't even know what they were looking at. Outside, the first distant rumble of naval artillery rolled across the fields like thunder. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. Was it weather or war? The general's adjutant turned to him. "Should we wake the Führer?" Dollmann hesitated, just long enough for history to shift under his feet, because by the time they made the call to Berlin, it would already be too late. June 6, 1944, 03:42 a.m. The Cotentin Peninsula. Rain lashed against the hedgerows. In the darkness, shadows moved. Not animals, not farmers, but men. Thousands of them. Paratroopers from the US 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions dropped from the sky like ghosts. Their parachutes snapped open against the wind, some catching on trees, others tangling in church steeples. Private John Steele of the 505th found himself dangling from the bell tower of Sainte-Mère-Église, the wind thrashing his body as the church bell rang again and again, each toll marking another moment the Germans were losing control of Normandy. On the ground, German sentries scrambled for their rifles, shouting into the darkness. But it was chaos. The Allies had dropped decoys, dummy paratroopers with firecrackers, Rupert dolls, to confuse the defenders. Machine guns rattled in every direction, tracer rounds lighting the sky. By dawn, dozens of small skirmishes burned across the countryside. Bridges were seized, roads were cut. German reinforcements trying to reach the beaches were suddenly finding every route blocked by men who seemed to appear out of thin air. At the German 84th Corps headquarters in Saint-Lô, the radio lines buzzed like hornets. "American troops everywhere," one officer reported. "We can't tell how many." "Paratroopers, sir. Maybe just commandos," another guessed. The truth. They didn't know. The confusion was exactly what the Allies had planned. Operation Fortitude, a masterstroke of deception, had convinced the German High Command that the real invasion would strike Calais, far to the northeast. Dummy tanks, fake radio traffic, even an entire phantom army under General Patton had kept German eyes fixed in the wrong direction. Now, as the first glimmers of dawn crept over the English Channel, German officers stood over their maps and realized they'd been tricked. But even then, they didn't understand the scale. Because as the mist began to lift, the horizon transformed into steel. Thousands of ships stretching from one edge of the sea to the other. Battleships, destroyers, transports. It was unlike anything the world had ever seen. A German officer at Ouistreham stared through his binoculars, speechless. "Mein Gott! It's the invasion." And from the radio bunker, someone whispered the words that would echo across every command post in France. "This is it." The storm had broken, but the realization that Germany had already lost the war hadn't come yet. June 6, 1944, 06:15 Ames, La Roche-Guyon, France, Rommel's headquarters. The telephone rang again and again and again. Colonel Helmuth Lang tried to keep his voice calm as he fielded another frantic call from Normandy. The reports were incoherent. Snippets of gunfire, broken transmissions, words swallowed by static, landing craft and thousands, Allied, beaches. But Rommel wasn't there. He was still over 400 miles away in Herrlingen, presenting a pair of shoes to his wife as a birthday gift. When he'd left 2 days earlier, he'd told his staff that the weather made an invasion impossible. Even the Luftwaffe's weather officers agreed. No sane commander would attack in those seas. Yet now the unimaginable was unfolding, and the man who might have stopped it was asleep. By 7 a.m., the reports began to merge into a single horrifying picture. Allied troops were landing on 5 beaches: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, Sword. Tanks were rolling through the surf. Bombers were hammering the Atlantic Wall. The very coastline Hitler had called impregnable was burning before their eyes. General Alfred Jodl at the Wolf's Lair received the first coded report. He read it twice, stunned. "This must be a diversion," he insisted. "The real invasion will come at Calais." And so, even as Allied troops fought their way off the beaches, Hitler's panzer divisions, the armored fist of the Wehrmacht, remained frozen by indecision. Orders were required from the Führer himself before they could move. But Hitler was asleep. His staff, terrified to wake him, waited. Every minute that passed, thousands more Allied soldiers reached French soil. The tide, both literal and historical, was coming in. At 9 a.m., Rommel's adjutant finally reached his car somewhere near Paris, urging him to return at once. Rommel, silent for a long moment, said only, "If this is true, we are finished." Back in Normandy, the beaches were turning into hell. At Omaha, German machine guns from the 352nd Division ripped through the first waves of Americans. Entire units were wiped out before they reached the shingle. Yet despite the slaughter, the Allies kept coming, wave after wave. From his bunker, General Dolman could hear the distant roar of naval guns. His aide whispered, "We must counterattack now." But Dolman didn't move. He stared at the map, at the names of the beaches, at the crumbling illusion of control. "Without panzer support," he muttered, "we are fighting the sea itself." And still, Berlin refused to believe. The deception at Calais had worked too well. Even as Normandy burned, they convinced themselves the real battle was yet to come. The irony? By the time they realized their mistake, the war was already lost. They just didn't know it yet. June 6, 1944, 4:30 p.m. The Château de la Roche-Guyon. Rommel's car screeched into the courtyard, mud and gravel spraying from its wheels. The field marshal stepped out, his uniform creased from the journey, his face drawn tight with disbelief. He could hear the hum of teleprinters inside, a relentless mechanical heartbeat echoing through the corridors. He strode into the operations room. Every officer stood. No one spoke. Rommel glanced at the map table. It was chaos incarnate. Red pins for German divisions, blue for Allied. And the blue was spreading, fast. "How long has this been going on?" he demanded. Colonel Lang swallowed. "Since 2 this morning, Herr Feldmarschall." Rommel's eyes darted across the map. The beaches, Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, Sword, were alive with blue markers. Reports from the 21st Panzer Division confirmed Allied tanks inland, near Caen. The invasion wasn't a diversion, it wasn't a feint, it was the beginning of the end. Rommel slammed his fist against the table. "Where are the reserves?" "Still waiting for authorization," Lang replied quietly. Rommel froze. Authorization. Hitler's authorization. The realization hit him like a blow. Hours, precious hours, had been lost waiting for the Führer to wake. The panzers that could have driven the Allies back into the sea were still idling miles away, paralyzed by bureaucracy and blind obedience. Rommel turned to the window, staring out at the gardens of the chateau, where sunlight glimmered off the Seine. It was almost beautiful, cruelly so. He spoke softly now, almost to himself. "The war is over. We just don't know it yet." No one in the room dared to reply. At that same moment on the beaches of Normandy, the tide was turning, literally and figuratively. The Allies had broken through. The first Sherman tanks rolled inland. British and Canadian troops were advancing toward Caen. American engineers were clearing mines, creating makeshift roads for the endless flood of men and machines that would soon pour into France. A German officer monitoring radio intercepts whispered, "They're unloading supplies directly onto the beaches. They're not retreating." By evening, Rommel sent a message to Berlin, a warning cloaked in military formality. "The enemy has achieved a large-scale landing. Reinforcements must be immediate, or the front will collapse." But deep down, he knew it wouldn't matter. Even as he dictated his message, Allied naval guns were still thundering offshore. The horizon glowed orange with fire, and over the crackle of the radio, Rommel could hear a sound that chilled him, the unending drone of Allied aircraft. For years, the Luftwaffe had ruled the skies. Now, there was nothing. No fighters, no interceptors, no air cover. The Reich had lost control of the air, and with it, the war. Rommel exhaled slowly, eyes fixed on the map. "This," he murmured, "is the beginning of the end." Outside, thunder rolled across the valley, but it wasn't thunder. It was the sound of history echoing across Europe. And by nightfall, every German commander in France would understand the same terrible truth. The war was lost. They just hadn't been told yet. June 7th, 1944, 2 a.m. near Saint-Lô. The guns had quieted, not completely, but enough that the sound became part of the night, a low, distant pulse rolling over the hedgerows. Smoke drifted through the air, clinging to the earth like fog. The beaches were behind them now, but the war, the real war, had just begun to move inland. Inside a dim farmhouse converted into a field headquarters, General Friedrich Dollmann sat alone, staring at a half-empty glass of schnapps. The walls shook faintly with each distant explosion. His adjutant entered, saluted and whispered, "The 352nd reports heavy losses. Omaha has fallen. They can't hold." Dollmann didn't look up. He simply nodded. The same words had been coming in all night like the tolling of a bell. One sector after another, collapsing. He finally spoke, barely a whisper. "So, this is it." The adjutant hesitated. "Herr General?" Dollmann turned his gaze toward the window. In the darkness, he could see the faint orange glow of fires on the horizon, the beaches still burning. "They told us for years the Atlantic Wall would hold," he said softly, "that it was unbreakable." He took a slow sip. But it was never the wall that was strong. It was the illusion. He set the glass down, hands trembling. And tonight, that illusion died. Outside, the distant rumble grew again. The Allies were moving deeper, their columns snaking through the bocage, every hedgerow a trap, every lane a killing ground. Yet they advanced relentlessly. At 3 a.m., word came through from Berlin. Hitler had finally issued his orders. Panzer Lehr and the 12th SS were to counterattack at dawn. Rommel read the message in silence. His expression didn't change, but everyone in the room could feel the weight of futility in the air. He knew, they all knew, that the order was too late. The Wehrmacht had been outmaneuvered not just by men, but by ideas, by deception, by timing, by scale. The myth of German invincibility had shattered in a single night. Rommel turned to his staff. "Tell them to prepare," he said quietly. "But understand, what we're fighting for now and is time." No one replied. By sunrise, the first German counterattacks were underway, desperate, fierce, but disjointed. Allied air power shredded entire columns before they could even reach the front. On the beaches, more men, more tanks, more supplies kept arriving. The tide was irreversible. And somewhere beneath the dull roar of battle, there was a deeper silence, a kind of collective knowing among the German officers. They didn't need an order or a speech or a declaration. They could feel it. The war had turned. The Reich would never recover from this night. Months later, as Paris fell and the Allies crossed the Rhine, many of the men who sat in those Normandy command rooms would look back on that single night, June 6, 1944, and remember the moment the ground shifted beneath them. Not when the first shots were fired, not when the beaches fell, but when they realized, too late, that everything they believed about German dominance, precision and control had already begun to crumble. In the quiet hours after D-Day, as dawn broke over the shattered coast of France, the future of the war was no longer in question, only its cost.